want to introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Elena Pagter, who recently completed her PhD at the Marine and Freshwater Research Center in GMIT, looking at microplastics in Galway Bay. She is a transplant from the States, just like me. And I'd like you all to please give a warm welcome to Elena Pagter. If you want to highlight her video there for me.
Hello.
Perfect.
I'm Elena Pagter. Like Erin said, thank you. It can happen to you. Yesterday, I was going out sampling out on the water, hanging on my boat. I was preparing for weeks for this, had all my jars, my bags, everything was ready. And then I did not on my itinerary write down that I should make dinner for myself, even though we were going out during dinner time. And so I did what maybe you have done and just shoved a bunch of snacks into my bag. And when I came home with all my trash, I realized I wasn't doing such a good job as like an earth ambassador. As someone who studies plastics, maybe I should be a little more conscious because I had this, a single-use flimsy piece of plastic. It can't be recycled anymore. We have red here, clear packaging. It's a film. It's gonna get stuck in the recycling machine. Then I have this slightly sturdier piece of plastic. You can hear that. Super nice. And if we check at the bottom in that triangle of arrows, it's telling me it's polystyrene, which maybe it's recyclable. It depends on the center, but it's a sturdy piece and I can just recycle it or at least reuse it myself. And last but not least, because I was pretending to be healthy, I had a banana. This isn't the same banana. I had a banana this morning, but we have a different kind of food packaging. And so you can see I have these 3 types, and we even have 3 different bins to deal with this waste. We got our general waste over here. We got our compost, but remember to take the little sticker off because this is plastic and we can't compost that. And then here we have a hopefully recyclable piece of plastic. For things like glass and metal, that's easily recyclable. We don't need new material to recycle these things, but for plastic, you always need virgin materials. So we're always adding new plastic in, which never closes a kind of circular recycling loop. And when I was a kid, I don't know if it's true for you, but I always heard the phrase reduce, reuse, and recycle, which made it seem really easy that anything I put in the recycling bin would just be recycled. I didn't have to think about it, but somebody else was thinking about it. And it turns out for plastics, it's not that easy. For Europe in 2019, almost 58 million tons of plastic was created, which is about the same weight as 85 million cows. I don't know if you ever tried to lift a cow, but try and imagine 85 million of those. And then that's the amount of plastic that Europe had generated in 2019. Since the 1950s, though, we have been using plastic in our everyday life, and it's only grown exponentially. But I don't know if you can have a little ponder and think about how much plastic has been successfully recycled since then. Is it 100%, less than 75, less than 50? If you were thinking only about 9%, you are correct. Only about 9% of all the plastics ever created have been successfully recycled. And that's including kind of upcycling, maybe this bottle turned into a bench, or downcycling, the same kind of thing. If it's not recycled, we can incinerate the plastic and use that heat for energy, or more than likely it'll end up in the landfill. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when you throw things away, they don't stay thrown away. Like you've seen a piece of trash just floating in the wind going who knows where because it hasn't been properly secured down. And maybe you are guilty too, where you'll see a bin off in the distance and you have your one piece of plastic that can definitely fit in the bin. Everybody else's plastic, it probably can't, but you know yours can definitely fit in there if you just carefully like squeeze it between the ice cream package and somebody's bottle of beer. But again, the wind, it can pick it up, take it all over the place, depending how close you are to a waterway. Maybe it'll end up in the river, heading out to the ocean. Or if you're already at the beach, it could just end up in the ocean right there. And then that's where we are now, dealing with plastics in the marine environment. Not always the terminus for plastics, but a lot of the times it is. And so when plastics enter the marine environment, they can be subjected to physical interferences like the wind and the rain, and also UV radiation. And these processes can help break up the larger pieces into microplastics, which is what I study. So microplastics are pieces of plastic that are either created to be small, pieces like glitter or microbeads that we used to hear all about in our lotions and scrubs and stuff like that, or they are created as a secondary microplastic where they've been broken up by those processes, or through bacterial communities breaking them up. Maybe a fish took a bite, or algae has also started to degrade its surface. Now, the plastic density also affects where it'll hang out in the marine environment. For really light or less dense materials, they can be floating up in the sea surface, maybe traveling around in the currents all over the world, get stuck in a gyre, one of the many gyres you've heard about, those islands of trash. And if they're not at the sea surface, they can float down, if they're a little more dense, to the sea floor, or with the exposure to toxic chemicals and heavy metals. Those can also attach themselves to the surface of the plastic, changing the density. And not only that, but those algal films can also bring these pieces down. Now, throughout the water column, they can be ingested by different organisms. So all the marine life that you know and love has probably encountered microplastics. In fact, over 600 species of marine animals have been identified to have microplastics in their guts, unfortunately. And if those animals cannot either throw it up or poop it out, the plastic can remain in their gut, which can be a physical barrier, meaning they can't get enough food to sustain themselves. Or, as we remember, those chemicals and heavy metals can be transferred from the plastic into the organism, and that can affect their behavior or their growth or other reproductive capabilities, which isn't too hot for the rest of the marine food web. Now, if it hasn't been sequestered in one of those environments, it'll probably be down in the seafloor. I mean, it should be at the seafloor, and it can be either resuspended back into the water and go through that whole cycle again, or it can get enmeshed into the marine sediments. And that's where I get to hang out and check out, see what's going on. So for my PhD project, like Erin said, I was working at the Marine and Freshwater Research Center at a GMIT, and checking out, quantifying and qualifying the amounts of microplastics that were in the marine sediments, the invertebrate, the organisms, animals that were living inside the sediment, and those that were on top of the sediment. So with the help of the Marine Institute, I was able to go sampling throughout Galway Bay, from the outflow of the River Corrib all the way to the other side of the Aran Islands, where we were using a box corer, which is, as it sounds, a box that cored the sediment. And that was what I used with sediment samples. And I also used that to look at the inverts inside the sediment samples. And for the organisms on top of the seafloor, I used a trawl, which is just a big old net to capture those organisms. Now, in order to see these microplastics, because they're so micro, we got to use a microscope. But first, we got to separate them out from the different matrices. For the sediment, I have to use this heavy liquid solution, which is, maybe you can see here. So I threw a bean, some water, and some oil. So the principle is the same thing for my plastics, where I have a heavier liquid that ideally will bring up the less dense peppercorn plastics, and then I will be able to retrieve them by filtering out this liquid and seeing what remained in that matrix. And once I have the filter, I can count and see, oh my gosh, how beautiful these are. I think these are plastic. And then I go to my other special machine, the Fourier Transform Infrared Microscope. And that actually tells me this is a plastic, this is not a plastic, good luck. And I get to do that for a few hours, you know, It was too long. It was too long. At any rate, that's for the sediments. For the organisms, I used a basic solution, which is like an acidic solution, except it's on the other side of the pH scale. And that was used for the gastrointestinal tract of the larger animals, like big old fish. I would just take those pieces and put them in the basic solution. And then for the smaller inverts, those were also put with the whole body because they're so small, so small. So their whole body got digested. Same process, filter it down, look at the filter, what's going on here, take it to the machine. Machine tells me more information that I love to know. And so what did I find out? Click here. You're gonna have to click here. Just kidding. I found that for all of the matrices,